Unicorn Overlord is a great game. From the pixel artwork, to the music, the gameplay, loop, and the ideas, it's definitely my top strategy RPG of the year. Even so early in the year, it may even be my game of the year, honestly. Of course, it's not perfect. It's going to have more modern sensibilities to cater to a more modern audience, but it's definitely worth a shot. Of course, there are a few choices that bring it down a bit, especially if you're a veteran of the genre like me. When it comes to gameplay in particular, there are a lot of choices that just tend to spoil the overall experience. And I understand that Unicorn Overlord is its own unique game, but in the space of the strategy RPG, it was a really strange decision to implement some of these game ideas in the way that they were done. Of course, the most notorious choice that you'll see around the community is a choice to give us complete information on battles before they're fought. In most strategy RPGs, when you get into a battle, you have a prediction system. You're told the chance to hit, the potential damage to be done, the chance for critical hits and whatnot. In certain situations, you may not be given any information at all. If you look at Ogre Battle, both March of the Black Queen on the Super Nintendo, and Person of Lordly Caliber on the Nintendo 64. Those are games that Unicorn Overlord is heavily inspired by, and they actually give you no information. They play more like a traditional strategy game where you get into combat and you really just watch it play out. Anything can happen, and then once combat resolves, you're forced to adapt to the situation. In Unicorn Overlord, battles tend to play more like a puzzle game, where the goal isn't to use your information and knowledge of the map to create squads and send them out onto the field. It's to try to solve a problem. The problem in this case being, how do you effectively complete encounters? Because in Unicorn Overlord, every mission has a number of enemy units on the board, and those enemy units will be made up of various characters. You can field your own units, and when they collide, you'll obviously get a battle result, as you'd expect from a strategy RPG. But since you can see the result before combat actually occurs, what tends to happen most of the time is you'll create squads and armies, and then you'll actually simulate the battles before you actually fight. So you'll look at the enemy, you'll look at what the results are. If it's a good result, you'll send your army to fight that enemy. If it's a bad result, you'll avoid that enemy. And it really cheapens the experience because you lose a lot of the suspense and a lot of the reactive gameplay that you'd come to expect in a strategy game. Understandably, Unicorn Overlord can be pretty complex. When you look at the modern market, games tend to be a bit easier, they tend to be a bit more accessible so that everyone can play and enjoy them. But eventually it'd be nice to really approach it like a traditional game. If you look at something like Fire Emblem, if you look at something like XCOM, those games have the potential for bad turns, they have the potential for losses, they have the potential for situations where you run out of luck or you have an unlucky break and then you're forced to come back. And most of the time in these games, the most exciting part, the most engaging part, the most interesting part is coming back from a bad situation. You've sent your unit into battle, you've gotten unlucky. How do you as a commander pull your bacon out of the fire? Unicorn Overlord really does not have this because you pretty much know exactly what's going to happen every time. You know if this formation is going to be effective, you know whether or not the enemy is going to get a lucky break, you know whether or not you're going to score a critical, you know whether or not a unit's going to be taken out, and you can make all sorts of adjustments to ensure that you get exactly the result that you want. Definitely a pain point for a lot of us, looking for a more engaging experience. Also definitely impacts replayability in a major way, because once you understand how things work, it's really just solving the same puzzle over and over again. And if you're familiar with puzzle games, once you've solved the puzzle once, there's really no reason to attempt it again. There are a few ideas that I'd like to see implemented. Of course, Unicorn Overlord is very accessible. but there are a lot of us who would like a more engaging experience, so this should definitely be an option for those of us who want it. It shouldn't be forced on anybody in the way that the current battle results is being forced on us veterans and newcomers alike. It's not great to lean in one direction and then argue against it for something that does the exact same thing only for another audience. In terms of options that could be introduced, the first one is pretty straightforward. If you look at the Colosseum and you look at the mock battle, there is no battle result at all. So really, you're forced to create an army, pit them against an opponent, and then hit go. And then you don't know what's going to happen until combat actually resolves. Sometimes there will be lucky evasions, there will be lucky crits, an unexpected unit may die, etc. But it plays much more like a traditional strategy RPG where you're forced to react to the situation, and then you're forced to make decisions from there on. I definitely enjoy that type of game. Again, as a veteran of these strategy RPGs, it is very familiar. It also falls in line with the general gameplay idea. You know, you're not actually the one determining the flow of combat. That only happens when you've really polished up your skills, really dug into the game and understood all the mechanics. Then you can somewhat narrate the direction of encounters. This won't always be the case because there is chance for variation, but you'll generally have a good grasp of the situation. So in Unicorn Overlord, what would happen is you would create an army, you would take the information that you have based on the map and the opponent, as well as your own abilities as a commander, and then you'd send your units forward and see what happens. Ideally, you would get a good result. If you don't, then you react to the situation. Maybe you lose a unit, maybe you lose an entire squad. But there are ways to come back from that situation. Unicorn Overlord in particular has a number of ways, between valor skills and items and the ability to swap units in and out of squadrons. The ways to come back from a bad situation are truly endless. So I think in particular that would probably be the easiest implementation because it is already utilized in the game. A better middle ground implementation would be to reduce the accuracy of the information provided. So instead of giving the player exact numbers and exact information on who's going to win and who's going to lose, you could just let players know whether or not it's going to be a win, whether or not it's going to be a draw, whether or not it's going to be a loss. So we kind of keep the same puzzle-like gameplay loop where you're looking for good encounters and you're aiming your armies towards those, but you wouldn't be able to fine-tune everything to get exactly the result that you want. If I'm getting into a battle and I may potentially lose a unit, I can't shift my formation around to ensure that I lose no units. I can't use an item to reduce the likelihood of taking significant damage. I can't change my positioning to ensure that I get a total victory. It's really just, you're going to win this one. Do you think it's worth the risk based on your own knowledge, based on the situation? And then based on what happens, you're forced to adapt. Maybe you lose half of your army, but you win the encounter. Maybe it's an important army, so you only save it for important engagements. You won't be able to take one or two armies and run through the entire map anymore because there's the possibility that they may be weakened over time. And then if it's a loss, maybe it will be a strategically valuable loss. Maybe you're attacking a fortified position. Maybe you need to weaken an enemy army. And maybe even though you lose, you've obtained that objective, and now you can move forward with the rest of the mission. Much more interesting gameplay decisions to be made, as opposed to the current system we have, where it's really just fine-tune everything until you get exactly what you want, and then there's really no sense of challenge or urgency or anything that you would expect. Those are my ideas. I'd love to hear yours. Again, this is really just my thought on the matter. I felt like sharing it. Some people may agree, some people may not, but that's generally how it goes with these things.